All right. This is the 4 steps for fixing design problems from Tim Cain. I don't know what his 4 steps are. My 4 steps. Actually, that might be a fun. That might be a fun thing to challenge myself with. Is before this starts, what would be my 4 steps if I could only make 4 steps? By the way, don't look behind you, chat. But actually, behind the camera, the stink bug from yesterday is walking behind there. I was wondering where he went. I have to jump now, having a meeting to adopt a cat. Hey, good luck on adopting the cat. I'd love to see a picture later. Don't look at the. You guys want to see the stink bug? Okay, I'll show you the stink bug. Hold on. Here's the stink bug. You guys see him? He's back there. Being stinky. Okay, what would be my 4 ways to fix design problems? Before we even start, I think my 4 steps would be, is it even a problem? Like, you have to ask yourself, you think it's a problem. Is it? Like, why is it a problem? Compare this to what your intentions were for that design. Compare it to your pillars. Like, are the user stories of this resolved, or have you created more issues and you haven't resolved the initial intentions that you set out to achieve, right? So it's like, just go back to square one. What were you trying to achieve? And is this achieving what you wanted? Is it achieving only some of the things you wanted, or is it achieving absolutely none of them? That would be step one. Then step two is just talk. I would just say, just sit down, designers, programmers, artists, whoever just wants to talk, just sit down and talk and see if you can find a new way to resolve it. Maybe something that was outside of a bit outside of the box, or something that you didn't anticipate, or that you couldn't think of without the help of somebody who just is maybe a bit more right-brained than you, right? Because I think a lot of designers are probably quite left-brained, or problem solvers, and people who are right-brained can kind of just take you into a new world of thinking, and I love it. I love, like, artists especially are like very right-brained, and it's really amazing to talk to artists for me. I don't know what the other steps would be. Let's see what Tim says.
Hi everyone, it's me, Tim.
Hey, Tim.
And today I want to talk about fixing design problems. These are not bugs. I'm not talking about the game is, nearing completion and there are things that aren't working right. I'm talking about you make a design, give it to your programmers, and they're like, we gotcha. And they implement it, and the artists all go, here's your good stuff, put it in. Here's everything you asked for.
And you play it, and it's like,
all in and working exactly the way you asked, but there's a problem. Now I'm going to use an example from the original Fallout game, design problem that it shipped with. So I can use that as an example as we're going through. So in the original Fallout, you could buy an energy weapon skill. In fact, you could tag it right at the beginning of the game if you wanted to. The only problem is energy weapons aren't available for at least the first half and closer to the first 2/3 of the game.
Oh, yeah. I think actually we were talking about this yesterday in one of our reactions to Tim, where I was using a very, very, very similar game as an example, which was Underrail, which I felt kind of forced you into taking certain perks or having certain skill setups early in the game, because the early game was rather challenging and made it difficult to get through without taking like melee weapon perks or whatever. I kind of forget with what my issues was, but regardless, the exact same problem here is with Fallout, where you're saying you don't get energy weapons until quite late into the game, but you can take the perk, and therefore you're kind of hurting your play style early on if your plan is to go deep into energy weapons. For me, an easy fix would be to introduce a new way to get through early parts of the game by utilizing energy weapon skills, right? By maybe, I mean, you could even just make a really like makeshift energy zapper, right? which now doesn't need melee skill, it needs energy weapon skill. And it's not very good. It's a melee weapon. It's kind of shitty, but it is something you could use early on in the game, right? I think there are a lot of ways to solve this from a rather creative standpoint. But I mean, there are problems that exist that are similar to this that you can't solve as easily. But that is one. If I could give an option here, you could also just warn the player, like, hey, you can take the skill that you've just selected, but just know you don't get energy weapons until pretty later. The issue is that kind of spoils the player, and it kind of tells you, hey, make your character. But hold on, not in that way, because it's not very good until 60% of the way through the game. I would avoid that. I think the easier solution would be to make like a melee weapon that is like a zapper. It's still a bit of work, you know. You need the animations, you need the artwork for it, the 3D and the 2D, and then you need to balance it, and then you need to localize the text for it, maybe add some sound, of course, to it. But at least you give players an option to utilize their energy weapon skill early on without making energy weapons only be ranged weapons.
So you have tagged or spent points in a skill
Yeah.
that will be completely and utterly useless to you.
Except maybe dialogue.
So this is a problem because it may not be what was intended, but it's certainly what the design allows, and it is not a bug. Everything is working exactly the way the design document said. So I think there are 4 steps when you have you have to go through when you're fixing design problems. And step 1 is simply to notice that you have the problem. Something we did not do in Fallout. That is a good first step. So for a game like Fallout, the issue is you have so many different types of PCs, player characters, that when you do a playtest, you may not notice that issue, especially if you're playing a player character that doesn't even have that skill. Because you don't have that skill, you're not noticing that there aren't any energy weapons dropping in the game.
Mm-hmm.
QA might not notice the problem either. Not just because of the characters they're making, but they may make a character that has the energy weapon skill, but they don't think this is a problem. It seems to be what's planned.
Yeah, I mean, because like you said, it's in the design document. I think that some QA that I know would probably raise that as a not necessarily, well, it would be like a design bug, right? It's just a bug for designers to look at as, or they might just contact you and say, hey, are you meant to be able to pick this even though it's not useful? Yeah, I mean, it's a challenging one because I think though in Fallout you can tag multiple skills, like 2 or 3 of them. In the first one, correct me if I'm wrong, I know that in later Fallout games you could pick 3 skills to tag. Earlier Fallouts might have only been 2. So even if you pick energy weapons, you might still pick something else that is useful. I don't know. That is a really specific but tough issue to fix. Because at one point you don't want to nullify players from playing the way they want, but at the same time you don't want to warn players that something they picked might not be useful early on. I think for me, I would just make a melee energy weapon and not base it off of like strength, right? Ooh. That stink bug scared the shit out of me. I don't know. He just kind of like plopped right down.
Energy weapons come late. So they may or may not report it. They may think it's what's intended. For both of those reasons, that you may be playing a character that isn't affected by it, or you may be playing a character that is, and you think it's supposed to be that way. This is another reason why I like telemetry or logging or whatever you want to do in your game to record game sessions, so that you can collect these sessions and then run a report and go, hey, what's the show me when energy weapons tend to show up and where they come from.
Well, also that, but you can say like, okay, quit rate. You can say, okay, how many players are choosing energy weapons as one of their starting tags? And I think it could be quite common, considering energy weapons are cool. You know, they're not just regular guns. They're not regular melee weapons. So they're kind of something that you don't find in other RPGs. And then how many of those players who choose it quit early on or remake characters because they realize that there aren't any energy weapons early in the game. And if there aren't that many that do it, you could say, well, players aren't quitting if they pick energy weapons, but maybe they're having less enjoyable experiences. Then you would go to like some play tests and you would say, are you upset that there, how many players are complaining that there weren't energy weapons early in the game and pick this perk? That might be more common, right? It's not enough to quit the game, and it might not be enough to make a new character, but it might be enough to make the early game a bit more frustrating.
And then you notice they're all shoved to the end of the game, and you're like, huh, that's a problem. So now that you have noticed that that problem exists, the first thing you want to do, or the second step, is confirm that the problem is really a problem.
Exactly.
This may sound obvious, but a lot of people don't take this step where you think you've noticed a problem, but now you actually want to make sure if it's really a problem. In this case, with the energy weapons, you want to make sure this is an issue of the energy weapons literally not being available versus this just being randomness and a low sample size.
True.
I've talked in earlier videos about
too.
Nobody understands randomness. So maybe there is a vendor who randomly has an energy weapon and they've just never had it on your playthrough. I've had this happen to me where people say, hey, I've played the game 5 times and that vendor never had an energy weapon.
It's like,
and if
well, congratulations at being the, 1 out of 100,000 people that this could have happened to based on stats. I would say that I don't know, I didn't watch his video on randomness, but, I worked on Darkest Dungeon, right? And that was a massive topic in terms of feedback, right? Because the game, almost everything was based off of random rolls. So Murphy's Law, whatever can happen will happen, meaning that no matter how rare it is, with enough iterations, that rare thing will happen. So that was a common problem where people just experienced a really bad bout of randomness. They think that the game was changed in some way or that there was some secret hidden function behind the game that was like punishing them for some reason. And it's like, no, you just got really, really, really unlucky. That's it. So yeah, I mean, but you can counteract randomness as a designer by purposefully doing things. So like the tutorial of Darkest Dungeon, which is actually something that I worked on and made, the map specifically was, no, actually the whole thing I pretty much was that you can specify certain things to occur, right? You can script actions. So if you know that people are often encountering the fact that this rare energy weapon isn't spawning, maybe there's some merchant who will always spawn one on the first time that you interact with him, right? Or maybe you insert a quest that rewards a energy weapon. That way you have something that's a bit more immersive and tied to a story. Something like that. So I think there are a lot of ways to solve this problem, but he is right that we also talked about, you have to ask yourself, is it actually a problem? And I know that a lot of designers, I was the same way early on in their careers, they will reactively change things based on feedback because they don't want anybody having friction points in their game. It's just they will hear feedback, they will say, oh, I'll fix that for you, and they'll just do it without even thinking, is this something that should be fixed? Or is this something that should be fixed in the way of that is being asked or required, or requested, I should say? Or is there maybe another more roundabout way of fixing the problem because the problem really stems from something else, right?
look and go, well, there's a 1 in 3 chance there's an energy weapon at that vendor. Well, guess what?
33% times 5, that's your chances for that occurring. Now, I'm not going to be very good at mental math of 33, or not 33. No, it would be 33% to the 5th power for that to happen. So 0.33 to the, oops, I squared it. 3,000th of a chance. That's the likelihood, or about 4,000th of a chance. That is the likelihood for you to be that one person that encountered that issue, right? I think you can even divide it by 100 by 1 to get the No, not divided by 1. 1 divided by. Times 100. So 1 out of 25,000 people will have that issue.
1 in 3 to the 5th power is only something like 1 in 300 or something. It might even be less than that. The point here is you could play the game 300 times and notice in one of those playthroughs
He was a little off,
that
that's
vendor
nobody can do that
never-
mental math very well.
never has it. So it's not that rare of an event. So you'd have to go back and look in your look in the game to see if that's actually something that just can happen randomly or it's really happening.
Yeah.
And again, this is why telemetry helps, because it doesn't look at 1 playthrough or 10 playthroughs. It looks at thousands of playthroughs. And I wish we had this, because even though we had QA playing our game all day, every day, Fallout was a 40-hour game to get through the main story arc and some of the side quests. So what tended to happen was we delivered a new build to them once a week, and everyone in QA could play through with a player character once on that build. If you wanted to play from start to finish, it took you 40 hours to do it, which is a full week.
QA is tough, man.
What happens when you're confirming the problem is you go look at the design docs.
So it's like, oh, welcome back to the new week. Here's your new build to play. Start the game again. Next week. Here's the new build. Play it again. Next week. Play it again. At a certain point, no matter how much you love the game, and it's actually very rare for QA to like the game that they're working on. In fact, many people in QA will specifically work on games they don't like because they don't want it to sour their experience with that game, which unfortunately means that they're playing games that they don't really like. So I'm just saying, just respect your QA people more. It's a very tough job, and they're often not playing something that they strictly enjoy.
The lack of an energy weapon dropping anywhere, is this expected? Does it appear in any vendor list? Does it appear in any loot list of creatures that can show up earlier in the game? Now, you can look at the design docs to see if that was actually written down as a goal. Remember I told you to put goals in your design docs? Maybe there's a goal.
Oh my god, I say the same thing. Put goals, right? I talked about user stories at the start, but I also just mentioned this as like specifically what are you trying to achieve? What is this feature? What is the system trying to achieve? And especially with your balance, what are your balancing goals? It's so important because it's comparable. You can just compare that directly to what the thing is. Does the thing accomplish these user stories? Does it accomplish the goals? Sorry, I get sidetracked, but that is so important, and they're about 80% of the designers that I've ever worked with don't use goals. They don't put goals. They don't ever talk about what this feature is supposed to accomplish.
Here saying we want all skills to be available, even ones that won't be usable yet. So maybe that's something someone wanted. We didn't use goals in the Fallout design.
That doesn't mean that it's a good goal,
right there.
But you can say, okay, this is intentional.
Well, people can always just buy the energy weapon skill later. Sure, they can, but letting them buy it early is just completely wasting points, and it's misleading to them. It's saying, here's a skill you can use. Oh, but you're never going to be able to use it. That'd be like not putting any locks into the last map of the game and saying, well, I know you tagged pick locking, or lock picking, but too bad, you're not going to use it till the end of the game.
One of the things that I feel a bit mixed about was a game called Solasta, which was a CRPG. A very well made game, by the way. I do recommend it. But they allow you to pick certain perks and traits for your character. However, they specify the ones that are actually usable in that campaign. Now, the reason that I think that they included it, that I didn't really realize this when I first started the game, where you could pick like a language, which you would never use in that campaign, was because they have multiple campaigns, right? So they included all the things that could be useful or might be used for like role-playing purposes. But they did tell you, like, hey, there's no usage of this in this entire campaign. So, you're picking it for role playing purposes at that point. So for me, it was like, well, why include it? But at the same point, well, I was like, well, you might make a campaign later on that does utilize that. So I can see where you would want to import a character. You would just want to have a unified character creation system. Well, I don't know. You could also get away with just hiding the ones that aren't available in the campaign. So that's an option too. I don't know where the stink. Oh, I see the stink bug. He's just walking around. Okay.
So that's bring us to the third step, which is now fixing the problem.
Yeah.
And you may think, well, that's really obvious. Just put some energy weapons in the game early. You sure you can. The big question there is, where will you put them? Because
Yes.
depending on where you put them, they might still be missed by most people on a common playthrough. If the only energy weapon is, in a character's inventory that you're unlikely to kill or pickpocket, or if it
Most
has
players
a
will
low
miss
chance
it.
of dropping in a vendor table, or low chance of dropping off some creature, or maybe it's a creature people tend not to encounter, or when they do, they don't kill it, you may still have energy weapons not appearing early enough in the game to make that skill worthwhile.
Yeah, and I think that Fallout 4 did a pretty decent job at this with they had both the makeshift weapons, but they also had the, oh god, what were they called? Like the musket, the laser musket that you get really early in the game. I think that those are pretty enjoyable new weapons to add, and they gave you a way to utilize your energy weapon skill pretty early into the game while still not being able to have, the good old laser rifle and plasma rifle or Gatling laser just yet. So I think that was a really good trade-off to fix this problem, and would be one that I would probably choose too, which is to add shitty versions of all types of weapons early into the game so that no matter what sort of um, weapon-based skill you tag, you do have some method of moving forward while utilizing the weapons that you primarily enjoy playing with.
Also, if you put a lot of them in, they're probably going to have to be weak or low level energy weapons, which again may make people go, well, why did I spend points to have these sad weapons?
Progression.
So another problem, or another solution, which is not as obvious, is change your system design. This is something that you can do pretty easily by just saying, hey, the energy weapon skill is locked until the player's a certain level or some other prerequisite is met.
Yeah, that is one
You
option.
can do skill specialization and say energy weapon is a specialization of the weapon skill, and you have to put so many points into the weapon skill before you can specialize it into energy weapons.
That could work too.
Then it's something there for the player to build towards, but he's putting points in the base weapon skill, which lets him use the weapons that are already in the game. And by the time he has enough points in that and he's specializing the energy weapons, that's when the energy weapons will tend to drop in the game. That is exactly what we did in the Outer Worlds. We put specialization skills under base skills. So in the Outer Worlds, you had to spend points in the ranged combat skill until it hits 50, and then you can start specializing. I believe it was like single-handed guns, long guns, and heavy weapons. So it didn't matter that heavy weapons were a little more rare than the other two. People weren't spending points in that skill. They were basically spending just points in generic ranged combat until they got high enough to specialize it. And that's one way of fixing your design problem without having to change loot tables or re-itemize the world. You basically do it in the skill system itself.
Although I think specializations are not as simple as that, although it depends on the game, right? You might still have to. It's just a different system of progression. Rather than boosting up skills directly, now you're having specialization, so you have to put your upgrades into like basic trees, and you could do. I just dropped my cap to my drink. You could do simpler trees like Mass Effect. Let me see if I can find the talent tree. Yeah, you could do it like this with Mass Effect, which I think then showed specializations afterwards. Yeah, like this, exactly like this. So this is where you could choose specialists. There weren't that many choices, but you could rank that up, and then at the end you get to choose between like two various types. So he's talking about rank up like a basic ballistics or firearms skill, and then at a certain point you get that branch where you can choose between A and B, or A, B, and C. And that does work, although I think that changes the Fallout for me a little bit, so I don't know if I would directly go to that for Fallout, personally.
And then now that leads us to the very important fourth step that sometimes people forget, which is test the solution.
You actually confirm that it fixes the problem, and
I've already pointed out ways
applies to your goals.
have fixed the energy weapon skill, by potentially dropping it early in ways that would fail. Either it still has a good chance of not showing up, or the things that drop are so weak and bad that nobody really considers this a solution. So what you should always do is, after you've made these changes, you have to go back in and test them. Even better, make a test plan for QA and have them, when they test it, know that this is a problem.
Good idea.
And here's a test plan of what you want them to go do. Like, make a note of when you find energy weapons, or when you get the energy weapon skill. Is the energy weapon skill useful, and are you using it? Those kind of things for them to test.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why you need to have up-to-date documentation, is because usually the first place that QA is going to check if there's a potential bug in the design is the design documents. And if they have to go through it and say, well, this is old, this is new, but design is still working on it, it's just like there's a lot of caveats here. Or then they have to waste your time as the designer, because QA is constantly hounding you for up-to-date information on something that they're testing. It's why documentation is so important, and it can be so easy to think that your game design is just about you making the things. The sting bug flew away. Making the things and dictating how they're supposed to be made, but it's you have to document so that you have that list, that the goals, the exact way that something is supposed to work. And that way, a lot of people who want to know how it works, especially QA or maybe programmers when they're implementing it, can use that document, and you can spend time doing the things you need to do, which is balancing, writing new documents, fixing up old documents, or organizing things better for people. Spend the time. It sucks. Documentation is not the funnest part of game design, at least for me it isn't, but it is very, very important for a team.
And then, while you're doing this, while you're involved in the energy weapon skill and doing stuff like that, look at the other skills that are on the player list and see, do any of these have an issue?
True.
For example, lockpicking. Are there enough locks to pick? Disarming traps. Are there enough traps out there? All the different subtypes of melee weapons. Are they in the game? Are they dropping correctly? Are there chances for the player to use first aid and doctor frequently? Do these conditions get applied frequently enough that they want to use them? Are there items that fix these things so no player would ever want to take those skills? These are things you should look at, because while none of these are bugs per se, they're problems in the design. And this is what I've always told designers, is that you can write a perfect design document and it can get implemented exactly the way you intended by the programmers. And all the assets can be made beautifully and wonderfully and work perfectly by all your artists. And you still get it in the game, and you're like,
paper design really only takes you so
what
far.
I want, or it's what I asked for, but it's not what we should have.
Yes.
Those are the kind of design problems you need to fix. And this is the 4-step method to fixing them, which is notice it, confirm it, fix it, and test it. So I hope this was a good summary of fixing design problems in computer games.
Yeah, that was another great video from Tim.
Let's see.
Stop it. Another great video from Tim. Here's the link. I'll send it to you guys. You guys can give this a like. Check out his other videos. I mean, that's a really, really good use case scenario too that he uses here. There's so many problems. There's so many ways to fix that problem is what I mean. And I think too, as a designer, especially if you're making like an RPG like Fallout, is to consider that even if it's not assumed that the player will be able to find an energy weapon until late game, just know players will find a way to get an energy weapon much earlier as a sort of like challenge run, right? is usually you're not supposed to get an energy weapon until you do this and this and this, but if you lure the NPC over here, you aggro them, lure them over to some like super mutants, and you help out the super mutants a bit, you can actually loot the dead body, grab the energy weapon, and then run away, and now you have a laser rifle very early into the game. So there are some ways that, depending on what type of game you're making, it can be worthwhile to just not put in those barriers and just say, well, the player is very, very, very unlikely to find this, and trust me, even if you don't think that they're going to, they will find a way. Speed runs exist for a reason. People love to find ways to break games or to manipulate the balance of a game. And just embrace it. Embrace that, because even if somebody is breaking your game, if it's not so easy or accidental to do, right? If it's not like just player wasn't trying to break the game and they broke the game, because that's more of like a bug. If player was trying to break the game and they broke the game, if they're having fun, just let them do it, right? Let the players have the fun, even if it kind of destroys the balance of your game, because they found a new way to play that makes them enjoy it. And I think that's part of the beauty of making a game like that, with a bit of a sandbox nature to it. So that's all I have to say about that. That was another great video by Tim. So if you're watching on YouTube, thank you for that, and see you on the next one. Take care.